You once said the most dangerous person is one who is articulate. What would you recommend to a one who wants to learn to speak in a more articulate manner?
Well, articulate is an interesting word, because if your joints are articulated, and that means you can do things with them because they're articulated, right? They're not one solid, vague mass. They're differentiated. Speech is a form of articulation in that manner because the act of speech itself is extremely complicated. It's a very complicated motor activity, right? It's a very complicated action to dance with your tongue, let's say. And it is definitely the case that there is no more exceptional form of the capacity to be dangerous than to be articulate. And one of the things that really shocks me is that young men in particular are never taught this. It's like, well, why be literate? Well, do you want to be competent and dangerous, or do you want to be vague and useless? Because those are your options, and I don't care what your job is. It doesn't matter what you end up doing. If you're a plumber, I have great respect for plumbers, by the way, and you're articulate, you can negotiate with your clients, you can introduce your coworkers, you can make a case for your employees, you can advertise your services, you can think through your problems. You're firing on all cylinders. So it's a great thing to be articulate. And it would be so lovely if our educators were wise enough to communicate this appropriately to young men who are striving forward. Because he was articulate, he could explain to his superiors the situation on the ground. Because he was articulate, he could make a case that the men under his command who were deserving would be promoted. Because he could think in an articulate manner, he could plan strategically and not lose battles. Okay, so that's the case for being articulate. And what's the alternative? You want to be inarticulate? You want to say and like and and pause and stumble and be unable to formulate a strategy, be unable to elucidate a vision, be unable to compel and convince other people, to entice them with your articulated vision of what might be? You want the opposite of that? Why would you want that? You would choose awkwardness over grace? It's preposterous. It's beyond foolish. So, how do you become articulate? Well, by paying attention to what you say. That's a good start. And what do I mean by that? I mean, pay attention to what you say. So as you walk forward, you can feel with your next step where the stone might be. And then you feel it's solid, then you take that step, and then you do the same thing with your foot again. You search and you find out what's solid, and you step on it, and you move forward in that manner. That's what you do with your words. It's the same thing. You feel, and you feel, is this the right word? Is the fact that I'm uttering it putting me together and making me intact and stronger, or is it tearing me apart and making me dissolute and weak? I noticed 40 years ago, when I started thinking these things through, that much of what I said actually made me feel weak. I didn't know why exactly, but sometimes some of the things I said didn't have that effect. They weren't accompanied by a sense of shame, let's say. They weren't accompanied with a sense of vulnerability. They were solid. And at the beginning, that was probably only about 5% of what I said. The rest of it was instrumental. It was language I was using to get my way, to attain proximal victories, right? To appear smart, let's say, to win an argument, something like that. A very different idea than merely feeling my way along to see what word was appropriate for what moment. But you can learn to do that. And you can listen to yourself, and you can stop humming and hawing and using like and and fillers. And you can take the time necessary to craft your words carefully. When you're in a discussion with someone, you can ask yourself, they might present you with a question or a conundrum or a proposition, and instead of responding with what you know to be right, so to speak, you could just ask yourself, what do I actually think about that? But it has to be a real question. It has to be the kind of question that you'd pose to someone you didn't know. It has to be a question predicated on the idea that you might not know who you are and that you could ask. And so someone will present you with a question, you think, okay, what do I think about that? But you have to want to know the answer, and then the answer will make itself known, because that's how thought works, and then you can just communicate that answer. And if you do that, you'll be interesting right away. You'll be interesting to the person that you're talking to. And if they do that to you, they'll be interesting too. And then if you both do that, you'll have an interesting conversation. And if you have an interesting conversation, you'll both grow as a consequence. And that's actually the pathway to growth.